The morning sun rose over the Imperial Palace, painting the tall towers in shades of gold and red. Yuna woke before the light touched her small room. She always woke early. Servants who woke late received punishment, and Yuna had learned long ago that punishment in this palace was something to avoid at all costs. She dressed quickly in her simple gray uniform. The fabric was rough against her skin, but she did not complain. Humans never complained. That was the first rule she learned when she arrived at the palace 3 years ago. The second rule was even simpler: be invisible. The Draconian Empire had conquered Earth 40 years ago. Yuna was not alive when the great ships came down from the sky. She was not alive when the cities burned and the governments fell. But she grew up hearing the stories. Her mother used to whisper them at night, telling her about a time when humans walked free, when they built their own cities and made their own choices. Those days were gone now. Humans existed to serve. That was their place in the galaxy. Yuna walked through the long stone corridors of the palace. Other servants moved past her, their heads down, their feet silent. Some were human like her. Others were from different conquered species. But they all shared the same look in their eyes. It was the look of creatures who had learned to make themselves small. The Imperial Palace was the heart of the Draconian Empire. It was a massive structure of black stone and golden metal, built thousands of years ago by the first dragon emperors. The current emperor, a being called Kang, had ruled for over 2,000 years. Yuna had never seen him up close. Few servants ever did. He was like a god to them, distant and powerful, sitting somewhere far above in his throne room while they cleaned floors and carried trays. Yuna's first task of the day was to clean the western corridor. She carried her bucket and cloth and began her work. The floor was made of smooth, dark stone that reflected like a mirror. She had to make sure not a single mark remained. Lord Tejan, the noble who managed all palace servants, checked the floors himself every morning. If he found a single spot of dust, the responsible servant would suffer for it. As she worked, Yuna felt the familiar ache in her arms. She did not look at the bruises hidden beneath her sleeves. She knew they were there, purple and yellow marks that covered her skin like a map of pain. Some were old. Some were fresh from just 2 nights ago when Lord Tejan had found a small tear in one of the dining room curtains. It was not Yuna's fault. She did not even work in the dining room. But Tejan did not care about fault. He cared about fear. And beating a human servant in front of the others was a good way to create fear. Yuna finished the western corridor and moved to the next task. She worked through the morning without rest, carrying water, folding linens, polishing silver. Her body moved automatically while her mind stayed quiet. Thinking too much was dangerous. Thinking led to anger, and anger led to mistakes, and mistakes led to pain. Around midday, she passed her friend Hana in one of the service hallways. Hana was also human, a girl about Yuna's age with tired eyes and quick hands. They did not speak. Speaking during work hours was forbidden, but Hana's eyes moved to Yuna's wrists and her face showed a flash of worry. Yuna shook her head slightly. She was fine. She was always fine. What choice did she have? The afternoon brought a rare assignment. Yuna was told to help serve tea during the Emperor's Council meeting. This was unusual. She normally worked in the lower levels of the palace, far from the important rooms where nobles gathered. But one of the regular serving girls was sick, and someone needed to fill her place. Yuna's hands trembled as she prepared the tea tray. The other servants gave her quick instructions. Keep your head down. Do not make eye contact with anyone. Move quickly but silently. Pour the tea from the left side. Do not spill a single drop. The council chamber was the largest room Yuna had ever seen. The ceiling rose so high she could barely see it. Great pillars of black stone lined the walls, carved with images of dragons in flight. At the center of the room was a long table made of dark wood, and around it sat the highest nobles of the Draconian Empire. They were terrifying to look at. Draconians appeared almost human in shape, but their skin had the faint texture of scales. Their eyes were gold or silver or red, with pupils like vertical slits. When they spoke, Yuna could see their sharp teeth. Each one of them was taller than any human, stronger than any human, and older than any human could ever hope to be. At the head of the table sat the Emperor himself. Yuna's breath caught in her throat when she saw him. Emperor Kang was different from the others. His presence filled the room like heat from a fire. His skin was pale gray, almost silver, and his eyes were pure gold. He wore simple black robes, but there was nothing simple about the power that radiated from him. He was ancient. Yuna could feel it. He had lived for thousands of years, had seen empires rise and fall, had watched stars die. And now his golden eyes were looking at the documents before him, while his nobles discussed matters of war and trade. Yuna moved around the table, pouring tea into each cup. Her hands were steady now. Fear had pushed away the trembling. She could not afford to make a mistake here. One wrong move and she would not just be beaten. She would be killed. She reached the Emperor's place at the table. For a moment she stood frozen. Then, keeping her eyes fixed on the cup, she poured his tea. The liquid flowed perfectly. Not a single drop spilled. She stepped back, ready to retreat to the edge of the room. But the Emperor moved. It was just a small motion, a slight turn of his head. His golden eyes lifted from his documents and looked directly at her. Yuna felt her heart stop. No one looked at servants. Servants were invisible. That was the whole point. The Emperor's gaze held her for only a second. His expression showed nothing. No anger, no interest, nothing at all. Then he looked away, returning his attention to his council. Yuna stepped back into the shadows at the edge of the room. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. She stood there for the rest of the meeting, silent and still, waiting for it to end. When the council finally finished, she helped collect the empty cups and left the chamber as quickly as she could. In the service hallway, she leaned against the cold stone wall and tried to breathe. He had looked at her. The Dragon Emperor, the most powerful being in the galaxy, had looked at her. A human, a servant, a nobody. Yuna did not understand what it meant. Perhaps it meant nothing. Perhaps he had simply glanced in her direction by accident. She told herself this as she returned to her duties, as she cleaned and carried and served through the rest of the day. But deep in her heart, something had shifted. For just one moment she had not been invisible. For just one moment she had been seen. She did not know if that was a good thing or a very, very dangerous thing. In the Imperial Palace, being noticed usually meant pain. And Yuna had already known far too much pain in her young life. That night she lay in her small bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring more work, more silence, more hiding. The bruises on her arms would heal and new ones would take their place. That was her life. That was the life of every human in the Empire. But somewhere in the palace, in a throne room made of shadow and gold, the Dragon Emperor sat alone. And though Yuna did not know it, he was thinking of her. He was thinking of the quiet human girl who had poured his tea with steady hands. He was thinking of the flash of fear in her eyes when their gazes met. And he was wondering why a simple servant was so afraid. A week passed after the council meeting, and Yuna tried to forget the moment when the Emperor had looked at her. She returned to her normal duties in the lower levels of the palace. She cleaned. She carried. She stayed invisible. Life continued as it always had. But then the orders came. She was assigned to serve tea at the council meetings again, not once but every day. Yuna did not understand why. The regular serving girl had recovered from her illness. There was no reason for Yuna to be there, but servants did not ask questions. They simply obeyed. So every afternoon, Yuna entered the great council chamber with her tea tray. She moved around the table, pouring tea for the nobles while they discussed the business of running a galaxy. And every day, she felt the weight of the Emperor's gaze. He watched her, she was sure of it now. Not openly, not in a way that others would notice, but whenever she was in the room, his golden eyes would find her. They would follow her as she moved between the nobles, as she poured the tea, as she retreated to the shadows. He never spoke to her. He never called attention to her presence, but he watched. The other servants began to notice too. They whispered among themselves. Why was the Emperor looking at the human girl? Was she in trouble? Was she going to be punished for something? Yuna heard the whispers and felt fear grow in her stomach like a cold stone. On the fifth day, something changed. Yuna was pouring tea for a noble called Lord Bikion when her sleeve slipped. It was just a small movement, just a moment where the fabric pulled back from her wrist. But in that moment, the bruises on her arm were visible, dark purple marks that wrapped around her wrist like a chain. She quickly pulled her sleeve down, but it was too late. She looked up and saw the Emperor staring at her wrist. His golden eyes had narrowed slightly. His face showed nothing, but something in his gaze had changed. Something had become sharp and focused. Yuna's hands began to shake. She finished pouring the tea and stepped back. For the rest of the meeting, she stood in the shadows and tried not to cry. He had seen. The Emperor had seen her bruises. What would happen now? Would he think she was damaged? Would he order her removed from the palace? Would Lord Tejan be told that she had been careless enough to show her injuries? The meeting ended. The nobles left. Yuna collected the empty cups with trembling hands and hurried toward the door. A voice stopped her. "Wait." It was deep and old, like the sound of distant thunder. Yuna froze. She turned slowly and saw that the Emperor had not left his seat. He was sitting at the head of the empty table, his golden eyes fixed on her. "Come here," he said. Yuna's legs felt like water, but she obeyed. She walked to his end of the table and stopped a few feet away, her head bowed low. She could feel the power coming off him like heat from a furnace. "Look at me," the Emperor said. She raised her eyes. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Meeting the gaze of the Dragon Emperor went against every rule she had ever learned. But she did it. She looked into his ancient golden eyes and waited for her punishment. But the Emperor did not look angry. His face was calm, almost thoughtful. He studied her for a long moment, as if he was trying to read something written on her soul. "What is your name?" he asked. "Yuna, your Majesty," she whispered. "Yuna," he repeated. The name sounded strange in his ancient voice. "How long have you served in this palace?" 3 years, your Majesty." "And before that?" Yuna swallowed hard. "I worked in the mining colonies on the outer planets, your Majesty. Before that, I lived on Earth with my family." "Your family," the Emperor said. "Where are they now?" The question hit Yuna like a blow. She felt tears burn in her eyes, but she forced them back. "They are dead, your Majesty. My mother died in the mines, my father." She paused. "My father was executed." "Executed," the Emperor said quietly. "For what crime?" "He spoke against a draconian soldier, your Majesty. He said one word too many. That was enough." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. His golden eyes never left her face. Yuna stood completely still, waiting for whatever would come next. "You may go," the Emperor finally said. Yuna bowed low and turned to leave. She had taken only 3 steps when his voice came again. "Show me your arms." The words were soft but firm. There was no room for refusal in them. Yuna felt her heart stop. Slowly, she turned back to face him. "Your Majesty, she began. "Show me," he repeated. With shaking hands, Yuna rolled up her sleeves. First the left arm, then the right. The bruises covered her skin like storm clouds. Some were fresh and dark purple. Others were older, fading to yellow and green. There were marks on her wrists where fingers had gripped too hard. There were larger marks on her upper arms where she had been struck. The Emperor looked at her arms for a long time. His face remained calm, but something changed in his eyes. They grew harder, colder. The golden color seemed to darken, like a sunset turning to night. "Who did this?" he asked. Yuna shook her head quickly. "It is nothing, your Majesty. I am clumsy, I fall often. It is my own fault." "Do not lie to me." His voice was quiet but carried a weight that made the air itself feel heavy. I have lived for 2,000 years. I know what marks from falling look like, and I know what marks from hands look like. Someone has been hurting you. Who? Yuna felt tears finally escape down her cheeks. She could not answer. If she named Lord Tejan, she would be killed. Nobles did not suffer accusations from human servants. It simply did not happen. I cannot say, Your Majesty, she whispered. Please, I cannot. The Emperor looked at her crying face, and something flickered in his ancient eyes. It might have been anger. It might have been something else. After a moment, he nodded once. You may go, he said again. Yuna pulled down her sleeves and fled the chamber. She did not stop running until she reached the servants' quarters in the lowest level of the palace. There, in a dark corner, she collapsed and cried until she had no tears left. That night the Emperor sat alone in his private chambers. The room was vast and dark, lit only by the soft glow of floating lights. He sat in a chair by the window, looking out at the stars. He thought about the human girl, Yuna. He thought about her steady hands and her frightened eyes. He thought about the bruises covering her arms like a secret written in pain. In his long life, the Emperor had seen many things. He had fought wars that spanned galaxies. He had watched species rise and fall. He had made decisions that affected billions of lives. In all that time, he had learned to see past the surface of things. He had learned to notice what others missed. And now he had noticed something that he could not ignore. The Emperor reached out and touched a small device on the table beside him. A moment later, a voice answered. Your Majesty. Captain Minyu, the Emperor said, come to my chambers, I have a task for you. Within the hour, Captain Minyu stood before the Emperor. He was a tall draconian with dark gray scales and sharp silver eyes. He had served the Emperor for 300 years and had never once failed in his duty. I want you to observe the human servants, the Emperor said, quietly, without anyone knowing. Watch how they are treated, watch who they fear, and report back to me. Minyu's face showed surprise. In 300 years, the Emperor had never asked him to do anything like this. But he was a soldier, and soldiers did not question orders. It will be done, Your Majesty, he said, bowing low. After Minyu left, the Emperor returned to his window. The stars burned cold and distant in the black sky. Somewhere in the palace below, a young human girl was nursing her bruises and trying to survive another day. She had no idea that the most powerful being in the galaxy was now watching over her. She had no idea that her suffering had awakened something in the ancient heart of the Dragon Emperor. Change was coming to the Imperial Palace. It would begin with a single question: who had put those bruises on her arms? And when the Emperor found the answer, there would be a reckoning unlike anything the palace had seen in 1,000 years. Captain Minyu was not a cruel draconian, but he had never thought much about humans before. They were servants. They cleaned and carried and served. They existed in the background of palace life like furniture or shadows. He had walked past thousands of them in his 300 years of service, and he had never really seen any of them. Now, for the first time, he was looking. He began his observation the day after the Emperor gave him his orders. He moved through the palace quietly, watching from corners and doorways. He wore plain clothes instead of his uniform so that no one would recognize him as the captain of the Imperial Guard. What he saw troubled him. The human servants moved through the palace like ghosts. Their heads were always down. Their shoulders were always bent. They spoke in whispers, and even those whispers stopped whenever a draconian came near. They flinched at loud noises. They pressed themselves against walls when nobles walked past. They moved like creatures who expected to be hit at any moment. Minyu had seen this behavior before. He had seen it in prisoners of war. He had seen it in slaves taken from conquered planets. It was the behavior of beings who had been broken by fear. He focused his attention on Lord Tejan, the noble who managed all the palace servants. Tejan was from an old and powerful family. He had served in the palace for 500 years, overseeing the cleaning, cooking, and maintenance of the great structure. The emperor trusted him to keep things running smoothly. But as Minyu watched, he began to see the truth behind the smooth surface. Lord Tijin visited the servants' quarters every evening. Minyu followed him there, hiding in the shadows. He watched as Tijin walked among the human workers, inspecting their living spaces. He watched as Tijin found small problems: a blanket folded wrong, a spot of dirt on the floor, a cup left in the wrong place. And he watched as Tijin punished these small problems with his fists. The beatings were brutal and efficient. Tijin would grab a servant by the hair, drag them into the center of the room, and strike them again and again while the others watched in silence. No one tried to help. No one cried out. They simply stood there with empty eyes, waiting for it to end. After the beating, Tijin would straighten his robes and leave without a word. The other servants would rush to help their injured friend, cleaning wounds and whispering comfort. But Minyu noticed that even their help was quiet and quick. They were afraid that Tijin might return. Minyu watched this happen 3 nights in a row. Each night a different servant was beaten, sometimes for real mistakes, sometimes for nothing at all. Tijin seemed to enjoy the power. He smiled while he struck them. He laughed when they cried. On the 4th night, Minyu saw something that burned itself into his memory forever. A young human boy, no more than 15 years old, had broken a dish while cleaning the kitchen. It was an accident. The dish had been wet and slippery, but Lord Tijin did not care about accidents. He dragged the boy into the servants' common area and raised his fist. But before he could strike, someone stepped between them. It was Yuna. She stood in front of the boy, her small body blocking Tijin's path. Her face was pale with fear, but her voice was steady. "Please, my lord," she said. "He is young. He did not mean to break it. Punish me instead." Tijin stared at her. For a moment his face showed surprise. Then it twisted into a cruel smile. "You want to take his punishment," he said. "Very well, I will give you his punishment and your own for speaking out of turn." What followed was worse than anything Minyu had seen before. Tijin beat Yuna until she could not stand. He kicked her when she fell. He continued long after any soldier would have stopped, long after the lesson had been made clear. The other servants watched in frozen horror, tears running down their faces. When it was finally over, Tijin stepped back and looked at Yuna's broken form on the floor. "Let this be a reminder," he said to the watching servants. "Humans do not speak, humans do not interfere, humans serve and obey, that is all." He left. The servants rushed to Yuna's side, carrying her to her bed and treating her wounds as best they could. Minyu stood in the shadows, his hands clenched so tight that his claws drew blood from his palms. He had seen draconian soldiers fight with honor on 100 battlefields. He had seen warriors face death with courage, but he had never seen anything like this. He had never seen someone willingly take a beating to protect another. The human girl had more bravery than many draconians he knew. The next morning, Minyu went to the emperor with his report. He told the ancient ruler everything he had seen. He described the beatings, the fear, the silence that hung over the servants like a dark cloud. He told him about the young boy and the broken dish. And he told him about Yuna, who had stepped forward to protect someone weaker than herself. The emperor listened without interrupting. His golden eyes grew darker with each word, but his face remained still. When Minyu finished, the emperor spoke. "Is there more?" Minyu nodded. He had spent the past 2 days investigating Lord Tijin more deeply. What he had found was even worse than the beatings. "Several human servants have disappeared over the years," Minyu said. "The official records say they were transferred to other locations, but I found no evidence that any of them arrived at their supposed destinations. They simply vanished." "How many?" the emperor asked. "At least 12 in the past 10 years, your majesty, perhaps more." The emperor was silent. When he spoke again, his voice was very soft. What else? Minyu hesitated. This next part was the hardest. I investigated the girl, Yuna. Her file says her father was executed 7 years ago for insulting a draconian soldier. But I found the original report. Her father did nothing wrong. He simply refused to let a soldier take his daughter. Take her where? To Lord Tejan's estate. Tejan had seen the girl and wanted her as a personal servant. Her father refused, so Tejan had him executed on false charges. The mother died 2 years later in the mining colonies. From the records, it appears she was worked to death deliberately. The emperor closed his eyes. For a long moment, he did not move or speak. Minyu watched the ancient ruler and saw something he had never seen before in 2,000 years. Pain. The Dragon Emperor, conqueror of worlds, master of the greatest empire in the galaxy, was feeling pain for a human servant girl. All of this happened within my palace, the emperor said finally. His eyes opened and they burned with a cold fire. Under my rule, in my name. Your Majesty could not have known, Minyu said carefully. Tejan kept his actions hidden. The servants are too afraid to speak. No one would have reported this. That is no excuse. The emperor stood from his chair. He seemed to grow larger, his shadow stretching across the room like a dark wing. I am the emperor. Everything in this palace is my responsibility. Every life, every suffering, every drop of blood spilled. He turned to Minyu. What do the other nobles think of Tejan's treatment of the humans? Minyu chose his words carefully. Most consider it normal, Your Majesty. Humans are seen as lesser beings. What Tejan does to them is seen as no different from training animals. And you, Captain, what do you think now? Minyu remembered Yuna standing in front of the terrified boy. He remembered the courage in her eyes even as Tejan's fist came down. I think, he said slowly, that I have been blind, that we have all been blind. These humans are not animals. They feel pain, they feel fear. They protect each other even when it costs them everything. That is not the behavior of lesser beings. That is the behavior of survivors, of warriors. The emperor nodded once. Something like approval flickered in his golden eyes. Bring me the seal of the Imperial Guard, he said, and summon all 10,000 guards to the Grand Throne Hall tomorrow at noon. Every noble in the palace is to attend as well. Minyu's eyes widened. All of them, Your Majesty. The full Imperial Guard has not been summoned in over 500 years. Then it is time, the Emperor said. His voice was cold and final. There is going to be a reckoning, Captain, and when it is done, this empire will never be the same. The Grand Throne Hall had not been so full in 500 years. 10,000 soldiers of the Imperial Guard stood in perfect rows, their armor shining like black mirrors. Their faces were hard, their eyes forward, their bodies still as statues. They did not know why they had been summoned, but they knew that something important was about to happen. Around the edges of the hall, every noble in the palace had gathered. Lords and ladies of ancient families, commanders of great fleets, advisors who had served the throne for centuries. They whispered among themselves, their voices creating a low hum that filled the massive room. What was happening? Why had the emperor called such a gathering? The last time this happened, a war had begun. Lord Tejan stood among the nobles, his face calm and confident. He wore his finest robes, black silk with golden thread. He had heard rumors that the emperor was unhappy about something, but he was not worried. He had served the palace for 500 years. His family had power and connections throughout the empire. Whatever problem had arisen, he was sure he could handle it. The human servants had been ordered to attend as well. They stood at the very back of the hall, pressed against the walls, trying to make themselves as small as possible. Yuna was among them, her body still aching from the beating she had received days ago. She did not understand why they had been ordered here. Servants never attended official gatherings. Something strange was happening, and strange things usually meant danger for people like her. A horn sounded deep and powerful. The whispers stopped. The entire hall fell into perfect silence. The Emperor entered. He walked slowly through the center of the hall, passing between the rows of soldiers. His black robes flowed behind him like shadows. His golden eyes looked straight ahead. But there was something different about him today. Something in the air around him crackled with energy. The soldiers could feel it. The nobles could feel it. Even the humans at the back of the hall could feel it. The Dragon Emperor was angry. He climbed the steps to his throne, a massive seat carved from a single piece of black stone. But he did not sit. He stood before the throne and looked out at the gathered crowd. His gaze swept across the soldiers, the nobles, and finally the servants at the back. For a moment his eyes found Yuna. She felt his gaze like a physical weight. Then he looked away. "I have ruled this empire for 2,000 years," the Emperor said. His voice was not loud, but it filled every corner of the hall. "In that time I have fought wars that spanned galaxies. I have made peace with enemies who wanted me dead. I have built this empire into the greatest power the universe has ever known. And through all of it I believed that I ruled with justice, that under my hand order was maintained, that the strong protected the weak." He paused. The silence in the hall was absolute. "I was wrong." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Nobles looked at each other in confusion. The Emperor wrong. The Dragon Emperor did not make mistakes. The Dragon Emperor did not admit to failure. "Crimes have been committed within these walls," the Emperor continued. "Within my own palace, in the chambers where I sleep, in the halls where I walk, in the very shadow of my throne. And I did not see them. For years I did not see them." He turned to Captain Minu, who stood at the base of the throne. "Tell them." Minu stepped forward. In a clear, strong voice, he described what he had found. He told the gathered crowd about the beatings. He told them about the servants who disappeared. He told them about the fear that hung over the human workers like a constant storm. He told them about a young girl who stepped forward to protect a child, knowing she would suffer for it. As he spoke, the nobles began to shift uncomfortably. Some looked guilty. Others looked confused. A few looked angry, but not at what they were hearing. They were angry that it was being said at all. Lord Tejan's face had turned pale. He stood frozen among the other nobles, his confident expression slowly crumbling. He knew. He knew that he was the one being spoken about. He knew that his secrets were being revealed before the entire palace. When Minu finished, the Emperor spoke again. "Lord Tejan, step forward." Tejan did not move at first. For a moment it seemed like he might run. But there was nowhere to run. 10,000 soldiers stood between him and every exit. Slowly, like a man walking to his own execution, he stepped out from the crowd and approached the throne. "You have served in this palace for 500 years, the Emperor said, looking down at him. "In that time, you have beaten hundreds of human servants. You have killed at least 12 of them, hiding their deaths as transfers. You have used your power to take what you wanted and destroy those who refused you. You had a human man executed because he would not give you his daughter. You worked that man's wife to death in the mines. And then you brought the daughter here to this palace, and you made her suffer every day of her life." Tejan fell to his knees. "Your Majesty, I can explain, they are only humans, they are not like us. The things I did, they were not crimes, they were discipline, training. The humans need a firm hand or they become lazy and useless. Everyone knows this. Every noble treats their servants this way." "Is that so?" The Emperor's voice was like ice. "Then every noble has been committing crimes in my name." He looked out at the gathered crowd. "Hear me now, all of you. From this day forward, the law of this empire has changed. Any human who serves within the bounds of my rule is under my protection. Their lives belong to me. Their blood is my responsibility. To harm a human servant is to harm property of the Emperor himself. The punishment will be the same as if you had struck one of my own soldiers." Gasps and whispers erupted through the crowd. This was unheard of. Humans given the same protection as draconians. Servants valued like soldiers. It went against everything the Empire had believed for thousands of years. Tejan looked up, desperation in his eyes. "Your Majesty, please, they are only humans, they are nothing, they are animals. You cannot compare them to us. You cannot." "Silence." The single word echoed through the hall like thunder. Tejan's mouth snapped shut. "You call them animals," the Emperor said softly. "You call them nothing, but let me tell you what I have learned about these nothing creatures." He stepped down from the throne, approaching Tejan until he stood directly over the kneeling noble. "When one of them is threatened, another will step forward to take the blow. When one of them is hurt, the others will gather around to help, even though helping could get them killed. They protect each other. They care for each other. They survive together." He looked out at the humans pressed against the back wall. "I have watched soldiers fight on 1,000 battlefields. I have seen warriors face death without fear. But I have never seen anything braver than a small human girl standing between a bully and a child, knowing what was going to happen to her, and refusing to move." The Emperor turned back to Tejan. "That is not the behavior of animals. That is the behavior of heroes. And you, Lord Tejan, with all your power and your ancient bloodline, you are not worthy to clean their shoes." Tejan began to shake. "Please, your Majesty, mercy, I beg for mercy." "Mercy?" The Emperor's eyes flashed. "Did you show mercy to the servants who died under your fists? Did you show mercy to the man you had executed, or the woman you worked to death? Did you show mercy to their daughter when you beat her night after night?" He stepped back. "You are stripped of your title. Your lands are taken from you. Your name is removed from all records. From this moment forward, you are nothing. You will be sent to work among human communities for the rest of your life. You will serve them as they served you. And every day, you will remember what you were and what you have become." Two soldiers stepped forward and grabbed Tejan by the arms. He screamed as they dragged him away, his cries echoing through the hall until the great doors closed behind him. The Emperor turned to face the crowd once more. His golden eyes swept across the nobles, and many of them looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Let this be a warning to all of you," he said. "The weak are not tools to be used and discarded. They are lives to be protected. If I hear of any noble, any soldier, any citizen of this empire abusing those who cannot fight back, they will face my judgment. And my judgment will not be gentle." He looked at Captain Minu. "What are your orders regarding the humans, Captain?" Minu dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty, what would you have us do?" The Emperor's answer echoed through the hall, carrying with it the weight of 2,000 years of power. "Protect them, as you would protect me." At the back of the hall, Yuna stood in stunned silence. Tears were streaming down her face, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of pain. They were tears of something else, something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. In the weeks that followed, the world changed. Word of the Emperor's decree spread across the galaxy like fire. Every planet in the Draconian Empire heard the news. Humans were protected now. Harming them was the same as harming any citizen. The punishment would be swift and severe. Some nobles resisted at first. They complained in private meetings and sent angry messages to the palace. How dare the Emperor compare humans to Draconians? How dare he give rights to servants? It went against tradition. It went against the natural order. It went against everything they believed. But the Emperor did not change his mind. When a noble on the outer planets was caught beating a human worker, he was arrested and brought to the capital in chains. His trial was quick, and his punishment was the same as Lord Tejan's. He was stripped of everything and sent to serve the people he had abused. After that, the complaints became quieter. Then they stopped altogether. The humans began to change too. At first, they were afraid that the new law was a trick. They waited for things to go back to the way they were. They kept their heads down and their voices low. But slowly, day by day, they started to believe. Soldiers who had ignored them before now nodded at them in the hallways. Nobles who had treated them like furniture now spoke to them with polite words. The fear that had hung over them for so long began to lift, like fog burning away in sunlight. Yuna watched these changes with wonder in her heart. Every morning she woke expecting the old world to return. Every night she went to sleep realizing that it had not. The bruises on her body healed. No new ones took their place. For the first time in her memory, she was not afraid. 1 month after Lord Tejan's fall, the Emperor summoned Yuna to his private chambers. She walked through the palace with shaking legs. Even though things had changed, the idea of meeting the Emperor alone still terrified her. She was still just a servant. He was still the most powerful being in the galaxy. What could he possibly want from her? When she entered his chambers, she found him sitting by the window, looking out at the stars. He did not turn when she came in. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near his own. Yuna had never sat in the presence of a draconian before. It was not allowed. But this was the Emperor, and when he gave an order, you obeyed. She lowered herself into the chair and waited. "Do you know why I changed the law?" the Emperor asked, still looking at the stars. Yuna shook her head. "No, Your Majesty, I have wondered many times." "Because of you." She stared at him. "Me, Your Majesty." The Emperor finally turned to face her. His golden eyes were softer than she had ever seen them. "I have lived for 2,000 years. In that time I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched stars die. I have commanded armies of millions and ruled over more lives than I can count. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the small things. I stopped noticing the people in the shadows." He leaned back in his chair. "And then I saw you pouring tea at my council meeting, a small human girl with steady hands and frightened eyes. I did not think much of it at first, but something made me look again. Something made me watch. And when I saw the bruises on your arms, I could not look away." "Why?" Yuna asked. The question came out before she could stop it. "Why did you care? I am nothing, just a servant." "No," the Emperor said firmly. "You are not nothing. That is what I learned. Captain Minu told me what you did for the boy, how you stepped between him and Lord Tejan, how you took the beating that was meant for him." He shook his head slowly. "I have known warriors who would not do what you did. Soldiers trained for battle, armed with weapons and armor, who would not willingly take pain for another. But you did." A small human girl, with nothing, but her own body stood against a monster to protect a child. He stood and walked to the window. "That is when I understood. Humans are not weak. They have never been weak. They are survivors. They endure things that would break other species. They protect each other even when it costs them everything. They carry hope in their hearts even in the darkest places." He turned to face her. "Your people have been treated as less than animals for decades, and yet you still find the strength to care for each other. That is not weakness. That is the greatest strength I have ever seen." Yuna felt tears in her eyes again, but this time she did not try to hide them. "I have an offer for you," the Emperor said. "The palace needs someone who understands humans, someone who can speak for them, help them, make sure their needs are met. I want you to take that role. You will no longer be a servant. You will be an advisor to the throne." Yuna's breath caught in her throat. "Your Majesty, I cannot. I am not educated. I do not know how to advise an emperor. I am just." "You are brave," the Emperor interrupted. "You are kind. You understand suffering because you have lived through it. Those are the only qualifications that matter." He extended his hand to her. "Will you accept?" Yuna looked at his hand, the hand of the Dragon Emperor, the hand of the most powerful being in the galaxy. She thought about everything she had been through, the loss of her parents, the years of fear and pain, the bruises and the silence and the endless struggle to survive. And then she thought about all the humans who were still out there, in the mines, in the colonies, in the service of nobles who had not yet learned to change. They needed someone to speak for them. They needed someone who understood. She took his hand. 3 months later, the great diplomatic summit was held at the Imperial Palace. Ambassadors from a dozen species came to discuss trade, treaties, and the future of the galaxy. They gathered in the Grand Throne Hall, the same hall where Lord Tejan had been condemned. The Emperor sat on his black stone throne. At his right hand stood Captain Minu, loyal as ever, and at his left hand stood something that made every ambassador stare. A human. Yuna wore simple clothes, not the fine robes of a noble. Her hair was pulled back from her face. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She looked small standing next to the ancient dragons and warriors of the Draconian Empire, but she did not look afraid. The ambassadors whispered among themselves. Was this some kind of joke? A human standing beside the Emperor, a creature that most species considered barely above animals. The Emperor let them whisper for a moment, then he spoke. Before we begin our discussions, I would like to introduce someone important. This is Yuna. She is my advisor on human affairs. She speaks with my authority and my protection. An ambassador from a neighboring empire laughed. An advisor, a human advisor. Your Majesty, surely you cannot be serious. The Emperor's eyes flashed. I am always serious, and if you doubt the worth of humans, let me tell you something. In my investigations of how humans were treated in my empire, I learned a great deal. I learned that they are not the weak, simple creatures we believe them to be. They are survivors. They endure. They adapt. They protect each other with a loyalty that most species cannot understand. He looked at Yuna. This woman has more courage than any warrior in my guard. She stood against a noble who could have killed her with one blow, and she did not flinch. She took beatings that were meant for children, and she never broke. She survived things that would have destroyed others, and she is still standing. The hall was silent. The ambassadors had stopped laughing. Humans are not weak, the Emperor said. They have simply been waiting for the galaxy to see what they have known all along. That survival is the greatest strength of all. He turned to Yuna and nodded. It was her moment now. Yuna stepped forward. Her heart was beating fast, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Thank you, Your Majesty. She looked out at the gathered ambassadors, meeting their eyes without fear. I am Yuna. I was a servant for most of my life. I cleaned floors and carried trays and tried to be invisible. I was beaten and abused and told that I was worth nothing. She paused, letting the words settle. But I am still here, and today I stand before you not as a servant but as a voice for my people. Humans have been conquered, enslaved, and forgotten by this galaxy, but we have not been broken. We have endured, and we will continue to endure because that is what humans do. She lifted her chin. The Draconian Empire has given my people a chance to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. And I promise you this, we will prove ourselves worthy of that chance. Not through war, not through conquest, but through the same thing that has kept us alive all these years. Through hope, through courage, through our refusal to give up, no matter how dark things become. She looked at the Emperor, and for the first time in their relationship, she did not bow. He smiled. It was small, barely visible, but it was there, a smile of pride. This is Yuna, he said to the ambassadors, and she has more courage than any warrior I have ever known. The summit continued. Treaties were discussed. Trade agreements were made. But the thing that everyone remembered, the thing that they talked about for years afterward, was the small human woman who stood beside the Dragon Emperor and spoke without fear. Change had come to the galaxy. It had begun with a single act of cruelty and a single act of compassion. It had grown through pain and courage and the refusal to look away from suffering. And it would continue to grow, spreading across the stars like the first light of dawn. Humans had been invisible for so long, but they would be invisible no more. On a distant planet, a human child heard the story of Yuna and the Dragon Emperor. She looked up at the stars and smiled. For the first time in her life, she believed that tomorrow might be better than today. And that belief, that small spark of hope, was the most human thing of all.